for you now to try and wash your hands of your share of the responsibility, I'm afraid that's a spot that will not out. All the perfumes of Arabia will not expunge that spot.
And all of your poetry, George, doesn't prevent people from being murdered and massacred in Iraq and Syria at the moment. I'm not washing my hands of what happened in the past.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I was
you've
still
already
in
done.
Parliament, I would be there tomorrow, living up to my responsibility to answer the call of the Iraqi government and people to help to support them. And the fact that you aren't is something that you will have to live with.
Let me ask a final question to you, George. If not bombing, if not intervention, how do we deal with this cancer?
Give Iraq the weapons that it's already paid for but haven't been delivered. Strengthen the Peshmerga, strengthen the governments of Iraq and Syria, and ask Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Iran to fight this battle.
Good evening. Evening. Would you have invaded Iraq with all these tens of thousands of lives lost if you'd clearly known there were no weapons of mass destruction?
I would still have authorised the invasion, yes, because I believe that Saddam was in breach of the United Nations resolutions and that the evidence does show that. Although you're right in saying that from what we know now, there weren't readily deployable weapons there at the time that the invasion took place.
From what we know now, wasn't that evident to some extent at the time?
No. I mean, I'm very happy to send you the intelligence reports which are now being published and which show quite clearly not just our intelligence services but others around the world thought that he retained the weapons that, of course, he used against his own people, because many, many people died as a result of his use of chemical weapons.
Well, bearing in mind the fact that tens of thousands of wholly innocent men, women and children have died as a result of the invasion of Iraq, tell me, Mr. Blair, how do you manage to sleep at night?
I don't suppose whatever I'm going to say is going to convince you of this, but I also bear in mind that there have been mass graves uncovered in Iraq with the remains of over 300,000 people, that there were 1 million casualties of the wars that Saddam started. And the best thing I can say, and that's to say, I don't think I'm ever going to persuade you on it, and I understand that, and I don't disrespect your view in opposing the war strongly. If you talk to the Iraqis who have just voted in their first democratic election, I think they would prefer their life and the future they've got now to the one they had under Saddam.
Mr. Blair, I personally think that's a very large, bright red herring. Obviously, every reasonable person wishes the very best to Iraq and its citizens, particularly now that it's been bombed to near destruction. And that yes, it is true. Oh, Mr. Blair, look at the pictures of Fallujah. They were like Dresden. In addition to which, terrorism has been introduced into Iraq, where there was no organised terrorism at all before. Of course, democracy is a good thing. And of course, we hope it works the right way. At this moment, we have no idea, do we, where this government is going to take Iraq in the future. Before too long, neither you or Mr. Bush will be able to pull the government strings.
Mr. Blair, can we also, I mean, we will in a sense go round in a circle, and you have said that you respect the fact that Neil has a particular point of view and that you may not be able to persuade him otherwise. In your answer, it seems to me that partly what you're saying, or maybe indeed wholly, is that it was, if you like, a moral decision to go into Iraq, that Iraq now is a better place as a result of Saddam Hussein no longer being in power than it was before. You've made it a better country.
Well, there is also the issue of the threat, because the whole evidence that's presented from the Iraq Survey Group saying there weren't readily deployable weapons at the time of invasion also found that he did retain the teams of scientists, the laboratories, and every...
I'm sorry, I just feel that's absolutely irrelevant, Mr. Blair.
Okay.
You had... Excuse me, Kirsty, just a minute, please. Your mandate to invade Iraq was on the basis of a direct threat to Britain or Britain's interest. If Parliament, sir, if Parliament had known the truth of the matter at the time, you would not have got a mandate to invade Iraq, would you?
Well, it was actually on the basis of the breach of the United Nations resolutions, and the same report I've just indicated...
You convinced Parliament as a result of the dossier, the September dossier, largely.
Well,
is that not true?
Actually, the September dossier was barely mentioned in it, but in fact, the real reason was the breach of United Nations resolutions. But look, let me just make one point to you, just one point, and I hope you also listen to what people in Iraq are saying. When you say there was no terrorism in Iraq before,
Organised terrorism,
yes,
I said, Mr. Blair.
There was organised terrorism. The whole state apparatus in Iraq was organised terrorism.
10, 20.
Neil,
I tell you
for a minute, you've had a very good crack at the Prime Minister, and I do have to say, apart from the people behind you want to question, we do have some interested parties also in the audience. I'm going to ask Natasha Paver, who I know would have been listening keenly to this, Natasha, because if the world is to be made a better place by Mr. Blair and maybe also Mr. Bush, you might have some suggestions as to where they could make it better.
Yeah, that's right. I'm actually from Zimbabwe, and my family has lost all their land. My friends have lost a lot of their family. And as you said, you did go into Iraq to take down Saddam off his pedestal. Why not have you dealt with Robert Mugabe, who is always in violation of the human rights?
Mr. Blair.
I mean, why haven't we invaded Zimbabwe?
Yes.
I don't think there would be any consent from any part in Africa to our doing that, and I think, frankly, it would not be militarily doable. I totally agree with you about Robert Mugabe, incidentally. I think he's absolutely repellent. I think what he's doing to his country is terrible. But I think that the only way, I'm afraid, of bringing about change in Zimbabwe is to bring it about through South Africa and the other neighbouring African countries. And I think if I was to advocate the British forces on their own invaded Zimbabwe, I couldn't. I mean, you're right.
Surely,
in what you're
Kirsty,
saying.
if we're going to go around the world dropping bombs on people, as has happened in Iraq, it should be done through the United Nations, an imperfect organisation, perhaps, but still the only organisation that exists.
Neil, and that is a statement, not a question. It is your statement. We've run out of time on you. Thank you very much for your questions to the Prime Minister.
How are you doing? I hope you're doing fine. And if you're not doing fine, I pray that you do okay. Yeah, do fine. So I want us to talk about something that is very related. At the surface, it seems it's not related, but it's very, very related. If you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. If you want to kill any dog, does not matter if it's Bosco or if it's a German Shepherd, they're all dogs. If you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. Yes, and that is what the world politics has always been doing. When someone is set to be assassinated, or when another government wants to take out another government, what they do is that they give that government a bad name. They find excuse to do wrong. They find excuse to do their evil deeds onto that government or onto that individual. And this is a case that is not different. The very first Prime Minister of Britain, many of us, not us, like this Generation Z, might not know of him, but his name is Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. Today we have Sunak, who is of Indian ancestry. But Tony Blair was English. During his reign, let me say such that way, during his reign came the Iraq War. You know, it's not to be called Iraq War. I don't know why they call it Iraq War, but does not matter right now. Let's go with the name they give it, okay? Remember, if you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. Now, the Prime Minister of Britain gave a bad name to Iraq. And why were they doing this? The Prime Minister of Britain, in conjunction with the President, George W. Bush, George Wack Bush, we have two George Bushes. I'm referring to George W. Bush. Yes, George W. Bush, who Obama took over. Yes, George Wack Bush. He was the son of George Bush. Yes, during the reign of George Bush is when we had the 9/11. I don't want to discuss much about the 9/11 in this video. But if you don't know something about the 9/11, you should go and check it out. Now, during the reign of these two people, George W. Bush and Tony Blair, there was Iraq War. This Iraq War was initiated by these two governments, the government of Britain and the government of USA. You know, USA was blaming Iraq for the 9/11. It said that Iraq was responsible for the 9/11, when a plane had hit the World Trade Center and it collapsed. Not entirely, but the upper parts, if you've watched the video. So the government of USA, George W. Bush, had bitterness with the president of Iraq, the head of state of Iraq. He believed he did that. But remember, in the Middle East, we have these terror groups. You know, we have the Al-Qaeda, we have the Taliban, we have the Hamas, which is now everywhere. We have the ISIS. We have so many of these people over there, and they're all Islam, you know. So George Bush is believing that Saddam Hussein is responsible for taking down World Trade Center, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, is having bitterness, concealed bitterness, you know. Something that is always happening with the West is that when they find something in your country, they will try and lure you to give it to them. But if you refuse to give it to them, what they do, they take over. They plant a puppet that is able to work what they want. And if they're not able to place a puppet, they remove the person who is in position. They remove the current head of state, and they place their own puppets on stage. Saddam Hussein was somebody who did not have any stance with the West. He had his own abilities. He had his own ideologies. He might have done many wrong things. Not he might. He is human. He had done a lot of wrong things. But we can't take away the fact that he was doing it for the people of Arab nations. He was safeguarding the natural resources of his nation. Not so much different with what happened in Congo when Patrice Lumumba was assassinated by the help of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Of where? Of USA. Just to be correct, CIA, Central Intelligence Agency of USA, was responsible for the murder of Patrice Lumumba. We have it in history, it's out there, you know. And then after that, they planted Mobutu Sese Seko into power, you know. And now in Iraq is having natural resources, oil, and they want to put their hands on this oil. You know what they do? They lie. They give Iraq a bad name. The bad name is that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, weapons that are a threat to the humanity race. They lie. A nuclear reactor is not something that can easily be made. The physics and the chemistry of nuclear, believe me when I tell you so, is very complex. And the resources to implement it is so huge. It requires a lot of capital. In Africa, we only have one in South Africa. In South Africa, we have one nuclear reactor. Even Kenya itself cannot implement such a thing. It's not something that you just wake up one morning and you go and construct. It's not a road. So they are saying that, okay, when I say nuclear reactor, it's different from the one in South Africa. The one in South Africa is being used to provide electricity. Now, let me tell you a small thing about matter. Matter contains energy. And matter is a wave form. And it's also matter. Like a substance can be matter, and it can also be a wave. Wave particle duality, according to Einstein's equation, energy is equal to mass deficiency times the speed of light squared in a vacuum. Speed of light in a vacuum. Okay. According to Einstein, when you take matter and you split matter, you get a lot of energy, you know. It's ironical that if I take 5 kilograms of sugar and I have a container on one side, an empty on one side, another empty on this side, I take this container of sugar and I pour the sugar, all of it, and measure the grams, find that it's maybe 5.12 grams. I come this other side, I pour it. I find that it's now 5.1 grams, or 5.10 if you like, grams. Now, there is a mass deficit of 2 grams. 2 grams is missing, you know. 2 grams is missing because I placed 5.12 here, and now here I have 5.1. Now, this is what Einstein is referring to as mass deficit. This mass deficit, if you multiply it by the speed of light squared in a vacuum, that is the energy equivalent of that small energy that is missing. Now, that is basically what the science is. It's so complex. Actualizing the science, it's not easy. And because that energy which is being produced from that reaction is so huge, the organizations such as UN has not allowed many people to be able to achieve this technology. Even if you had all the money and you wanted to have this technology, the world will not allow you. The UN first will not allow, the veto will not allow you, because they know what they know how impactful it is. And so Saddam Hussein, because he was enemies with Tony Blair, and he was now enemies with the president of USA, George W. Bush, they wanted to sort a reason to come to Iraq and commit atrocities and dethrone Saddam Hussein. They had to find a reason, and this reason had to convince the masses. They had to convince the masses that, you see that Saddam Hussein, he has an program. This program is being used to kill people. He is making weapons of mass destruction. I told you, you can use this energy. You can use it for electricity, or you can use it as a weapon, because it's so much energy being produced over there. Einstein proved that through his his theory of general relativity. We have the special relativity, which is also another aspect of nuclear energy, and then we have the general relativity. Now, the general is what I'm referring to right now. It's important you understand this, because you might ask yourself, how does nuclear cause somebody to be convincing to so many people that people will now be okay to vote them, go and fight? Because you've told them, hey, these people is having a weapon of mass destruction, a weapon that is able to wipe you out the face of the earth. The nuclear energy is so dangerous, so dangerous. The world does not allow anybody to produce it. Now they've managed to convince everyone. Everyone is convinced, hey. They come where? They come to Iraq. The British employ the MI6. The USA employ the special forces, whichever special forces they got. I don't know, I don't care. The MI6, I also don't care. They lied. They lied, and they caused atrocities in Iraq. They came to spill blood in another soil, and then they went away. You know? You might ask yourself, what was the world doing while these people were doing all this? It's the same as the death of Gaddafi. What was the world doing when Gaddafi was being killed? What was Africa doing? What was Africa? No. This world seems to be controlled by 5 people. 5 people who are on the table. The veto of the UN, you know. All the countries can vote yes, but if these 5 people say no, it's a no. They override the majority. Which makes me think, are we really living in a democratic world? Or it's a democratic world, not a democratic world. Eh? So we had presidents like Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki came and he talked. He said no. Listen to what Thabo Mbeki said.
One day I get a message from the US Embassy here in Pretoria to say, George, that President Bush would like to talk to you. So I said, sure. And indeed he called. This was on the eve of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And George W. Bush says to me, you know, what happens in a war, where, as you know, that we're saying we're going to go into Iraq because of these weapons of mass destruction. But you go to war, people die. And I don't want to be the one person who now has to go to talk to the American mothers and fathers that their daughters and sons have died. I really don't want to do that. But can't avoid it if there's a war. I wish we wouldn't go to war. And one other reason is because there's already a lot of anti-Americanism. If we go to war in Iraq, that'll get worse. And I don't want that. So I agree with him. I say, President, you're quite right on all counts. Therefore, don't go to war. Yeah. No, but does he have weapons of mass destruction? So I say, President, we sent a delegation to Iraq to talk to them about that and prepare a report. It's with your ambassador in New York. It's with Security Council. And our people who went to Iraq say there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That report is there in detail. Oh, he didn't know that, but he will check. And then I made a mistake. He says to me, if only I can get a signal from Saddam that he doesn't have, then we won't go to war. The mistake I made is I didn't ask him what signal would it be, because we could get the signal from Saddam. I forgot. So after we put the phone down, I sent a message to his colleague in London, Tony Blair, to tell him about this, that George Bush forwarded, and this is what we discussed. Please, can you get from him this, what signal does he want from Saddam? I know that the Prime Minister got the message. He never delivered to George Bush. Never delivered it. And so they went to war. And indeed found that there were no weapons of mass destruction. If we had known what signal George Bush wanted, and if Tony Blair had done his job of delivering our query, maybe there would not have been a war in Iraq in 2003.
You can see clearly that the world tried to stop it. Even Thabo Mbeki, a president of South Africa, tried to stop this evil thing from being done. Tony Blair lied, and his lies caused the death of a human, caused the death of millions. These people killed a lot of people. It was not only Tony Blair, it was the whole government of Britain. Tony Blair cannot act by himself. You know? He might have been the man at the higher table, but everyone is guilty. Even the pilot who was driving that chopper is guilty as well. Everybody ought to be sentenced. The most ironical thing is that Tony Blair is now alive and kicking. He's old though. He's old. We have George W. Bush alive and kicking. He is old. They are still walking on the streets, eating breakfast, going for fishing, watching movies on Netflix. These people should be in jail. They should be in jail. If ICJ is truly a place of justice, it should serve justice to those Arabs that were killed in Iraq. These people committed what is called a war crime. They committed a war crime and they ought to be sentenced. Remember what happened with Charles Taylor of Liberia. It's not different from what has happened, with this man from Britain and with this man from USA. They're no different. They just have the different skin colors. Remember, be it a Bosco or a German Shepherd, they are still dogs. And if you want to kill them, you give it a bad name. They have a bad name, but they're still walking. Where is justice? Where is justice? Now, you might ask me, how is this related with the stories of Africa? Now, Africa, we have Gaddafi. Gaddafi was done the same thing. me explaining the death of Gaddafi will be like, I'll be so redundant. It's just the same thing. Somebody's uprising, somebody's pointing out they're wrong, they take away the person. They gave him a bad name and they take them away. If you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. Just remember that. That is how the West operates. Kill a dog, give it a bad name. That's enough. They use your own people to terminate you. Your very own blood, flesh, relatives, families, brothers, sisters, mother, father, grandfather, everyone to finish you, you know? Now, the death of Saddam Hussein and the death of Patrice Lumumba, the death of Thomas Sankara, the death of Fidel Castro, the death of Magufuli, which is very controversial. The death of these freedom fighters should not go unforgotten. These people are people who struggle to fight for the liberty of their own people. Even though they did wrong, they should have been sentenced with their own countries, not the intervention of Western powers who are trying to attack this country in order to rip them off. Not to serve justice, but to rip them off. They find you with a nice thing and they want to take it away. They are breaking the 10 commandments. Do not covet your neighbor's property. Do not covet your neighbor's property. How rich is Congo? How has the West been covetous to Congo? It started with the Belgian, Napoleon. He killed 10 million Africans. 10 million. 10 million is a very huge figure. And this figure, each digit represents a human being. A single person, a white single person did this. With the colonial mindset that these freedom fighters have been trying to fight, they were overthrown. They used their own people to terminate them. Now it's evident we can never trust the West. That's why we are seeing issues of positivity happening in Mali, happening in Niger, happening in Senegal right now, happening in Burkina Faso. These people are standing up against imperialism, colonialism. The French, in as much as they finished colonizing Africa, they were still here. If Africa was not pumping France would be nothing. If Africa was not pumping it with the resources, it would be nothing. And so this is a reminder to you Africans. Sometimes you might be told someone is bad. Wait until you see them do wrong to you. And then you say, this one is bad. Don't wait for wrong. Go and find the good things this person has done. And then maybe that might change your mindset. You know? Maybe that might change your mindset. The genocide in Rwanda is not really said as the genocide where in the Nazi. All these are humans. We have Bosco and we have German Shepherd. All these are humans. All these are dogs. And if they're to be killed, they all deserve bad name. And if they all deserve bad name, all get to be, as the proverb says, you know. Now, that's all. That's all. I hope you get value from these videos. I hope you get enough value to enlighten you, to make you realize you're living in a very deceitful world. It's you to be smart. My people perish due to lack of knowledge. You don't have to perish in these times and days. We have the internet. We have channels like mine. Do subscribe, guys. Thank you. Subscribe and thank you. See you in the next video. Remember to stay awake and stay African. Be vigilant. Be robust. See you in the next one.